Mitch. Today is December 13th, and we have a week laying out ahead of us to decide what to do with it, how to do it, what to do with it, how to manage it, how to, some people would say, survive it. It would include all of those things. So welcome to a brand new week. You have joined or are listening to the Psych Monologues. It's a podcast devoted to exploring our journey toward wholeness and living in truth and grace and pursuing the profound mystery of our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with each other. So we are in the famed last 12 days of Christmas. I believe I've got that right. Yeah, we are. So by this time, you have collected a partridge, and you better get your wallet out because you're going to be forking over about $220 for a partridge by today's standards. So, and that's just the first day. So have at it. Good luck and go get them. By tomorrow, you will be out another $450 for two turtle doves. So all told, by the end of Monday, you'll be out $660, which is a great prospect looking ahead for the next 12 days. So that's the wonder of the non-reality of the 12 days of Christmas. Needless to say, Christmas brings with it, and the holiday season brings with it, a variety of emotions and reactions to people, for people, and that is right up our alley, if you want to put it that way, for the kinds of things I like to spend a Sunday evening talking about. So, but have you ever wondered how to accept grace? I get that question a lot, particularly given the fact that I spend a fair amount of time talking about shame and grace. That's all pretty much I've been talking about all this last 15 weeks or so. And the thing that occurs to me about that is that when we talk about how do I accept grace, I think we probably have got to wind the reel back a little farther and get at something that I would call a long-standing pandemic that we've been a part of actually for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, it probably has been a part of our spiritual, emotional, physical DNA since the beginning of time and humans, right down to the point in time when Adam and Eve were making the choice to go against what God had set in place for them in the Garden of Eden. They had the entire Garden of Eden, and just like two children who don't really care about the entire garden, they only care about what they've been told they can't touch. And so the moment that they cross over, and they each cross over in different ways, obviously men and women have continued to do so for all of time. So they cross over this threshold about whether God is good and whether he's good enough for the situation that they found themselves in. And it's not like they were a victim to the situation. It was a matter of the choices that they made and the deception that they bought into. And the minute that happened, it's fascinating that the first thing they did was run to God. No, they didn't do that. They did something that we all do, and that is hide. And so we have been a part of a long-standing pandemic in humanity for as long as, like I said, as long as time has existed or we have measured it. And I would put it another way. We are a people who are infected with the commitment to staying segregated people because it's a way to stay safe. Now, for Adam and Eve, they actually physically hid, which is laughable, really, when you think about it, because obviously we generally know all the characteristics of God being all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, all of that, all of the alls, if you will. But they hid. And we have gotten so much more sophisticated now, so much so that we don't need to physically hide but we can emotionally hide by separating ourselves out. I oftentimes talk about it as the stained glass. Some people would talk about it in terms of a mask. But we have been segregated. We have been disintegrated for as long as we've been around. And this disintegrated serves a purpose. Disintegration serves a purpose, and it allows us to stay safe. Now, let me give you an example. This may or may not work very well, but I think if you know anything about the subject that I want to talk about, or the example I want to use, you will begin to do the math. And the example is this, is that if you've ever read the really very popular series of Harry Potter and the series that J.K. Rowling put together, and we follow the adventures and exploits of a young boy who is a witch, and Harry Potter is afflicted with this mark on his forehead that is a part of his identity, and he's treated very badly, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're following with me on this, you'll understand the series, and there is an ultimate showdown between good and evil at the very end. And there's always a very, very evil antagonist or villain in this. And he is often referred to as he who shall not be named, otherwise known as Voldemort. And what we find out, and I'll just tell you right up front, this is a complete spoiler alert. If you've never seen the Harry Potter films or read the books or anything, sorry, but I'm going to rain on your parade for a second. And the thing that we begin to find out and put together by the time we get to the end of all the books is that Voldemort, who is a villain of the highest degree, has developed a following called the Death Eaters, and they're black witches that are following him. But the thing that he managed to do, which we find out much later in the books, is that the one way he could keep himself safe and from danger of his power being taken from him was spreading his soul across the landscape of the Harry Potter series and the world as they knew it into smaller pieces called Horcruxes. And what Harry and his friends began to realize is that if they got rid of these Horcruxes or destroyed them, then smaller pieces of Voldemort would also be destroyed, and he would begin to lose his power. But the thing to keep in mind is that Voldemort had, by the storyline, had taken his soul and broken it and infested it into smaller pieces into these Horcruxes so that no one could damage him. Now, for me, I start thinking about this in terms of what I just said, our tendency to hide, our tendency to be disintegrated, and I talk about the stained glass and the pieces and parts of ourselves. And what that looks like then is that there are very few people in my world, if I'm going to operate this way, who really know everything about me. I put various pieces out there for people to know, and they know that piece of me, which is kind of an interesting double entendre, isn't it? Because when I split myself into smaller pieces for only certain people to know, I experience absolutely no peace in the other sense of the word. But be that as it may, it was a exit ramp screaming for me to run down, but I'm going to stay on track here for the next 20 minutes or so. But see, we are afflicted with the same pieces. The same problem is that the pieces now become parts of compartments, and each compartment has a power of its own, a rules of engagement of its own. It has its own values and behaviors and expectations and all the things that really we have talked a lot about. So what have we been afflicted with is this idea of being disintegrated. And quite honestly, it's a safe way to live because I never invest all of me into some key relationships. And that way then, what? I am safe. I am secure. I am unassailable. I am protected because nobody has all the dirt, quote unquote, on me. So what's the solution? And this is where I get back to the idea of how do I accept the grace that is being offered me? And not only the grace that's being offered me in the season we're in, with Christmas, Jesus was referred to as a man full of truth and grace. And God stepped into our world, stepped down into our world to become one of us. Jesus was the embodiment of this grace that is offered us in a return to our relationship with God. Now, if I am so invested in keeping only pieces of myself available to key people and never having them all come together at one time, because that allows me to remain invulnerable, then what does the integrated life look like? I mean, Jesus is offering me grace. I would hold to the fact that if we continue, and I'm sure I will do this more at a later point in time, but the stained glass is always held together by lead. Lead is a very soft metal. It melts very easily with enough heat. But it keeps the compartments, the pieces of glass, apart. And it also creates a very nice picture. So if I'm going to undo this thing that I would call the stained glass self and seek to become more of an integrated person, because when you think about it, stained glass is disintegrated, and there's a beauty to the disintegration, but it's still disintegrated and it's still segregated. So if I want to accept grace, and grace is the antidote to shame. And I would say from the metaphor that the lead that holds the stained glass in place is actually shame. And so if grace is the antidote to that, and it brings about a fusing of these pieces of glass so that I can actually be seen, how do I accept the grace that I'm being offered? The reality is when you go back in time and follow the account of Jesus' life, he offered grace wherever he went. And people varied in their ability to actually accept that grace. It didn't negate the fact that he was offering it, but they could never experience it until they accepted it. So the stained glass that we present, the appearance we create for people to interact with, something has to break down. I mean, something has to take it apart and put it back together again in such a way with grace that I am able to be seen, which also means I am also vulnerable, which also means that I may not be as secure or safe if that's my highest value. Now, I will inevitably be asked the question about how. So I understand most Christians and most of the students I've talked to, they say, I get it, I understand, I've got to accept grace. And inevitably on the heels of that admission, and the thing to keep in mind is it is an admission of fact. It is not an admission or an embrace of truth. So they ask how, and oftentimes how is an interesting question because it hides what really is behind it. And what is behind the question how is show me how I can do it, and I can do it right, and then everything will be okay, right? So I want to know the manual, the manual for doing this thing right, which is essentially saying, I want to use shame, which is all about right and wrong and so forth. The method that has contaminated me, the thing that has held these pieces apart, I want to use that same thing to set it right and to be integrated, which is impossible. It just can't be done. So we have to get at another question, which I think is probably waiting to be answered in one of the podcasts here, is instead of me asking what or how do I produce something, maybe the question has to be, what is it do I cultivate that the outcome of that will be whatever I desire? Now, I would say that, and like I said, I'm going to walk through this for the next few times, I think, because it's important enough. But the first and hardest step in accepting grace is accepting our brokenness, which is a threat. It is a threat to our relationships. This is exactly why we stay disintegrated. Is to do what? Is to hide our brokenness, which is ironic, right? Because technically a stained glass is a broken glass. It's just put back together again in such a way so that people look at it new and ah and say what a wonderful person I am and how much I have things together, which is a lie from hell, but I make it look like I am. So the first and hardest step of accepting grace is accepting the reality, not intellectually assenting to it, but accepting the reality of our brokenness. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is, and I would have to point you back to one of my podcasts, early podcasts, I forget, it's probably in the first 10, when I talked a little bit about the ancient Japanese tradition and art form called kintsugi. Kintsugi is an art form. It's been in cultural, it's been done for generations in the Japanese culture. And basically it takes a broken piece of pottery and puts it back together using precious metals to hold the pieces back together. And they produce something of immense value, but also broken. It's broken, and there is a beauty in the brokenness, and that's what kintsugi actually takes advantage of. And the precious metal makes it more valuable, et cetera, et cetera. And I would refer you back to the podcast that I did about that. The thing to keep in mind here is that we have to distinguish what kind of brokenness we're talking about, though. Because there is a brokenness that is a result of damage or neglect or even trauma. And this kind of brokenness is fundamentally bad. It is connected to the brokenness of our time and the brokenness of who we are, particularly when this brokenness comes on me because of the sinfulness and the depravity and the evil in another person. So this is bad. This is always bad. And so this brokenness is not what we're talking about here. I mean, ultimately, that kind of brokenness needs to be healed. It needs to be cared for. It needs to be attended to. But there's another brokenness that we don't spend nearly as much time with, and particularly in the time that we live, where any discomfort, any difficulty, any adversity is met with, that's bad. It's a negative thing. In other words, if I experience something that is broken, then something has gone wrong, or I'm wrong, or I've done something wrong. That's the only solution or the only way that we end up with, that's the only conclusion we come to. So there's a brokenness that comes from damage, but there is also a brokenness that comes from growth and development and making mistakes. See, this brokenness is an indication of things improving, but it doesn't look that way. I mean, the only way to make my point is to think about kids as they're growing up. I mean, growing up, as the old song goes, growing up is hard to do. There are mistakes to be made. There are difficult things to learn from. And usually they're learned because of a mistake or a difficulty or because of that. Now, I can pronounce it good after it's over, but when I'm in it, it would be a lie to call it good because it doesn't feel good. But not all things that feel bad are bad for us. And so there is a brokenness that comes from growth and development. And the thing that we have to do with this kind of brokenness is to learn how to meet our flaws, our mistakes, our shortcomings, our limitations with grace and truth. Now, truth needs to be understood correctly because I oftentimes make the distinction between big T, little t truth. Big T truth is reality. Big T is the truths that we have come to accept as objective reality. Now, we're living in a time that fundamentally rejects that idea and it has made truth personally defined rather than truth being objectively defined. So ultimately, with that kind of way of thinking, all brokenness is bad. It just needs to be fixed. It needs to be maybe hidden. So this kind of brokenness points out the realities of who we are. And this kind of brokenness oftentimes is thrown into the same bucket as the brokenness that comes from damage or neglect or trauma. Because all brokenness is bad. It all feels bad. And if it all feels bad, then it must be. But if we're going to leverage this brokenness that comes from growing, from developing, dare I say it, even from trusting, then we have to accept the flaws that we have, shortcomings and limitations that we have with grace, and that means to accept them as they are, not as we demand them to be. Forget about the should be. We demand them to be. So if I'm going to leverage this kind of brokenness into something that is a good thing and develops me, then I have to meet it with grace and truth and an understanding of it. The second thing I have to remember is living with ambiguity and uncertainty. Why? Because this one ties back into a couple podcasts ago when I was talking about the allure of uncertainty. See, accepting reality as it is, the reality of me, my flaws, mistakes, limitations, my humanity, dare I say even that, then I have to admit that there's a lot about the world around me and a lot of the things that I deal with that I'm just uncertain about. I don't know. It's ambiguous. There is not a right or a wrong. There is the best I can do with what I have and the knowledge that I have. That's all I can do. But I don't walk away with that with absolute certainty that it'll all turn out. And it may not. But if I'm going to demand certainty from the reality that I'm living in, then I will stay committed to remaining disintegrated. Because the fundamentals of living an integrated life starts with what I do with the grace that is offered me. And the way I want to talk about this and look at it is what I'm going to introduce it now, and then I will pick it up in the next podcast. And what I want to do is I want to borrow a term from a spiritual director who is very well known, probably one of the more well-known spiritual writers of our time, and it's a guy by the name of Henry Nouwen. And Henry Nouwen proposed a way of thinking about this as what he would call the old country or the new country. And the old country is got a variety of characteristics that are a part of what wars against our ability to be integrated or accepting grace. And so the old country is the ways in which we operate that we are very accustomed to. We know very well. It is very predictable. It always works the way it should. And I'm perfectly comfortable in the old country. On the other hand, the new country is the country where grace is the guiding principle of life, and it leads to a variety of relational characteristics that I would like to unpack for you in future podcasts. But let me just lay it out, and then I'll build on it next time. We have been living in the old country for a long, long time. It is the country of law. It is the country of shame. It is the one that we are the most comfortable with. And we just need to call it for what it is. We're comfortable with it. Now, it may not be good for us, but who says that anything good, the things that are bad for us, feel good? I mean, a lot of times the very things that are bad for us are comfortable. They're known. They're predictable. They're all of those things. So what I want to do, in like I said, and I'm kind of setting this up for next podcasts, what I want to do is I want to look very carefully at the characteristics of the old country and the new country in terms of accepting grace. And what do we need to become aware of and begin to identify in ourselves of the old country ways so that we can begin to live more comfortably in the new country? And that's not easy. You don't just flip a switch, no more than you do hop on a plane, go through customs at Germany, and walk in and say, I'm here. I know exactly how to speak the language. I know all the innuendos and idioms and sayings that people have. I got it all, and I'm perfectly comfortable here. And I would suggest that you're a liar, because you talk to any missionary, no matter what country they go to, and it takes a while to become, quote unquote, comfortable in their new country. And we have to see our movement from the old country and law and shame to the new country of grace and growth and forgiveness and all the things that we give all sorts of lip service to while living in the old country. and so there's a lot more to this that has to be developed, and obviously I don't have time. I'm running out of time at a breakneck speed, and so I'm going to end the podcast here, and I will pick it up next time talking about the old country and new country and the aspects and characteristics that we need to identify in order to live lives of grace and accept grace. And that's it for tonight. So as always, I always have end of program reminders, a couple different things just to remind you about if you're new and listening for the first time. Thanks so much for joining us. But subscribe. Either follow on the website at drmitch.com, upper right-hand corner. There's a subscription box there. If you subscribe there, all of the content that I have produced over the years and also continue to produce, you will be notified when something new shows up, and you can go back and listen to it if you want. I have put up a couple different lectures of mine with a lot of this same material in it, and one I realized tonight that it actually is redundant with the other one, so I'm in the process of fixing that. But one is about accepting grace, and the other one is about living free. So the subscription offers you access to all of the content and material that is on my website, and I am producing over time with these podcasts and other things I've written and so forth. So that's the website. Or you can subscribe on a variety of social media channels. We're on Instagram at The Psych Monologues, all lowercase. On Twitter, it's at Ray Mitch. Facebook, Ray.Mitch. And LinkedIn, Dr. Mitch. So be sure, if you're not familiar with how my last name is spelled, it's Mitsch. People tend to leave that S out, and then it's like, where are you? And I generally would always answer, beats me, but let's go looking together. So the subscriptions are key to follow what we're doing and what we're trying to do. And I say we, not in the royal we sense. I look at the podcast as really a journey that I'm on with you, my audience, and whoever it is that's listening to me. Welcome to the adventure, which is kind and diplomatic at times, I think. So there's that, and you can also subscribe to me if you want to get the Podbean platform, which is where my podcast is hosted. It's Ray Mitch, all lowercase, .podbean.com. They have a player, et cetera, et cetera. You can also hear us on iTunes, on all of the media outlets that you have, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, of course, and then on Amazon Music. So you can hear us there too as well. And then lastly, but not least, I would ask that if some of the stuff that you're hearing is encouraging and you're more interested in, or you want to continue, pass along the subscription to somebody else. The more the merrier for this journey. But there's a key piece that is a focal point for me, because I do and lead students on retreats for a silent retreat twice a year. And we're looking for people that want to partner with us to continue to develop our scholarship fund for the CCU Silent Retreats. This allows a needy student to be able to go on one of these at least once during their time at CCU. The next one coming up is in spring of April 8th through the 11th, 2021. And so if you are interested and would like to partner with us, or you know someone that really has a heart for spiritual formation or supporting these kinds of efforts, you can go to the website and click on the CCU tab, and there's a drop down, go to the Silent Retreat, and there is a there is a GoFundMe site that we have set up to cultivate and get donations and funds to be able to disperse for each of the retreats to make it possible for a CCU student to join us. Phew, boy, I think that's it. That should be enough. Hopefully I've given you plenty to think about for the evening. And so I will bring us to a close tonight, as I always do. Love ya. Later.